We begin tonight, right now, with new fallout to an international scandal consuming the Trump White House. Tonight, Washington is reeling over a story unlike anything that we have actually seen in modern political history, and I realize that's saying something. But the president is admitting, open now to begin the week, that he sought election help from a foreign government, pressing Ukraine to go after a potential rival, Joe Biden. Now, we're tracking several responses right now. Congress dialing up the pressure with new calls for impeachment, including from some unlikely places, and some Republican rivals you see right here against Donald Trump going on Morning Joe together to argue this time today is different. And in some ways, it is clearly different. The president admitting a key and incriminating part of this story, that he was pressing Ukraine and may continue to do so to investigate Joe Biden's family, which stokes questions about what else the president stands accused of and what else is this White House hiding. Now, before we go any further into the details tonight, and we have new details for you, I want to be clear about the stakes. We're talking about the abuse of government power to shape or steal an election, which means we are talking about allegations of one of the gravest types of threats to democracy. Now, our founders focused on that very risk and tried to erect long-term systems to prevent it from ever working. And I don't have to tell you, lesser democracies than the United States have slid away from democracy and elections through the abuse of government power to hold power. Now, put Donald Trump to the side, because part of what I'm talking about is much broader than one person. Consider just the basic elements that have emerged here. Imagine Barack Obama pressing for a foreign probe of Mitt Romney in 2011 to help Obama hold power, or Bush against Kerry in 2003. If that is hard for people, even across the spectrum, to even imagine tonight, maybe the reason it's hard to imagine is because it's not normal. It is not within the push and pull of even ugly, bare-knuckled modern politics. And that any other president would probably, if that alone was what defined a moment in their presidency, face pretty bipartisan immediate outrage over it. So keep that in mind as you listen to President Trump talking about his view of what he did, this new scandal engulfing his presidency, and his phone call with the leader of Ukraine.
Conversation I had was largely congratulatory, was largely corruption, all of the corruption taking place, was largely the fact that we don't want our people, like Vice President Biden and his son, creating to the corruption already in the Ukraine.
This is not a drill. This is not normal. And if it feels like it has been partly normalized, it may be because the alleged bad acts are occurring in the open. Consider the comparison of the request Donald Trump initially made, which at the time was head spinning to the point that people didn't know what to make of it, asking during the middle of a campaign for a foreign adversary, Russia, to go after his then opponent, Hillary Clinton, and her emails. Now he's the president, and he's asking a foreign leader with the powers of the presidency to help go after another famous major rival with the weight of this government behind him.
Russia, if you're listening, I hope you're able to find the 30,000 emails that are missing.
Conversation I had was largely congratulatory, was largely corruption, all of the corruption taking place, was largely the fact that we don't want our people, like Vice President Biden and his son, creating to the corruption already in the Ukraine.
Two things jump out there that I want you to really think about as this unfolds. One, the president admitting to a key part of this that you would expect anyone to want to deny because it sounds so bad. And two, in the Russia context, Trump was a candidate. So he had to give that directive order in public if he was going to get anywhere with it. Now he's the president. So you don't hear the same direct language demanding Ukraine do it because, at least according to what are now accounts in multiple publications, that part he did in private, urging them 8 times to go after his rival. And the larger context is, of course, that Donald Trump publicly said he's welcoming offers of foreign dirt for 2020, told George Stephanopoulos that. He's also confiscated his own government interpreter's notes to hide details of conversations, not with every leader, as far as we know, but with Putin. And so we're in the territory of raising the question, what else is Donald Trump asking foreign leaders to secretly do to keep his grip on political power?
Did the president threaten to cut off aid to the Ukraine?
No, that was a false story.
100%.
Well, I can't tell you if it's 100%.
Because we know that.
All of this is reverberating, as I say. It's the big story tonight in Washington, with new pressure on Democrats over what are you going to do about this if everything up to now wasn't bad enough, according to the pressure they're seeing. And I'm going to walk you through some of it. Speaker Pelosi saying the administration must turn over the whistleblower complaint that sparked this controversy. She didn't use impeachment in her new statement, but she says if the Trump administration keeps hiding it, they will be entering a grave new chapter of lawlessness, which will take us into a whole new stage of investigation. Well, what does that mean? Others are pushing and saying impeachment must be put on the table. Freshman Congressman Dean Phillips from Minnesota comes out today. That makes the number now 135 House Democrats calling for an impeachment probe. Former Virginia Governor and DNC Chair Terry McAuliffe says the Democrats now, because of this, he tells the New York Times today, quote, have to take a second look at impeachment. And another centrist Democrat, James Carville, in the same story, is quoted saying he had previously opposed impeachment, but thinks now with all this together, it's time for Democrats to move quick and clean on it. Or take someone who has been surging in the Democratic field, Elizabeth Warren, saying Congress will become complicit in Donald Trump's actions if they don't impeach him. That is as direct a shot across the bow as you get to Speaker Pelosi. And Donald Trump talking to the Ukrainian president one day after Mueller's historic testimony to Congress. That may be a hint of something, that Donald Trump's potential or apparent takeaway from the ending of that 2-year probe was not foreign interference is something to avoid, but maybe it's something he just needs to get better at pursuing. I want to begin tonight with two experts on government ethics. Richard Painter was chief White House ethics lawyer in the Bush administration, and Walter Shaub, who actually served inside as a bit of an ombudsman of sorts in the Trump administration, director of something called the Office of Government Ethics, a nonpartisan position. He stepped down in July 2017 and now is a senior advisor at Crew, and Rutgers professor Brittany Cooper also with us. Richard Painter, what is your view of these reports of Donald Trump's attempted collusion with Ukraine to go after Biden? If this alone were the only thing on the table, would you view it as an abuse of power, as potentially impeachable on its own?
Well, first, there's absolutely no evidence that Vice President Biden and his son have contributed to the corruption in the Ukraine. What the president said was just false. Second, this is an impeachable offense, turning the powers of a foreign government against a candidate in the United States who is a political rival of Donald Trump. This in and of itself is impeachable. This president has committed multiple high crimes and misdemeanors. And what is happening when the House refuses to impeach him is that he continues to do more and more of it. And that is what is happening. He is emboldened to continue to violate the Constitution, whether it's the unconstitutional emoluments, whether it's using foreign governments against his political opponents, ignoring House subpoenas, showing the middle finger to the United States Congress, the abuses at the border. The list goes on and on and on. And if Speaker Pelosi doesn't have the courage to impeach him, he's going to keep on doing it. And the other thing he's going to do is stand up in the election in 2020, look at his opponent and say, look, I didn't do anything wrong. It's not illegal. If it were illegal, a democratically controlled House of Representatives would have impeached me. He is getting a pass from this Congress. It's critically important that the House not only start impeachment investigations formally, but that they vote out articles of impeachment. All of the evidence is already there. We don't need more to impeach this president. And if they don't do it, I think the Democrats are going to lose in 2020 and probably deserve to lose.
Wow, that's fierce. Walter, Donald Trump's appointees have been out acting like this is just another normal day on the Sunday shows, including his Secretary of State, who's obviously sort of caught in the middle of all of this. Take a look.
If there was election interference that took place by the vice president, I think the American people deserve to know.
If, for instance, President Obama had pressured a foreign leader, Putin or the president of Ukraine, anyone, and said, I want you to look into Donald Trump Jr., or I want you to look into Eric Trump, international businessmen, both of them, would you not find that inappropriate?
Again, I'm not going to speculate on that.
Walter?
Yeah, I mean, the words coming out of their mouths are worthless. These are partisan actors who are just trying to make noise to distract. The bottom line is this is, to my mind, the defining moment for what's going to become of our country. And my question is, where's the Senate? Are the Republican senators truly willing to say that from now on, it's fine for any president to use his high office or her high office to solicit an attack on our elections, and that it's not even appropriate to investigate that or demand a transcript and a whistleblower complaint that is legally required to be turned over and it's being withheld? So I think we're at the moment of crisis, and if they don't act, and sadly I'm not sure they will, we're looking at a future where anything goes for presidential abuses of power.
And that's starkly put, and I know you, as I mentioned, worked within this administration dealing with their response to standard ethics requirements. Brittany Cooper here in New York, I want to broaden out with you as we think about how it is that something like this is even moving forward in according to some, in a semi-normalized way, because we're not dealing with a traditional occupant of the White House. Right. I say that not as a political or ideological observation, but with the total disregard for how the government works. Right. And so in a normal situation, a lot of other things would be working better to make this feel like the 10-car alarm fire that many experts say it is. But those things have been whittled away. I wrote down just a couple examples to discuss with you. One is the number of vacancies in acting officials reduces the power of the experts, the so-called adults, to even have leverage within their given agency, to last a month to push back. The FEC, which explicitly deals with this kind of potential election interference, doesn't have enough officials for a quorum because the Trump administration refused to fill those spots. Press conferences, which whatever one thinks of the factual problems at the White House, if there were a press conference today, I think everyone in that room would be battering the press secretary in a way where we would at least test what is their best response to this. We don't have that. Why? That's the last piece I want to land with you on and play. Them basically, some people gloating about this on Fox News about why they don't even meet with the press for these briefings anymore. Take a look.
I think that it's so important that, you know, the spokesperson for the president can adequately speak to his policies and get his message out there. And I think the president saw that that's not what was happening. It had become, again, theater, and they weren't being good to his people. And he doesn't like that. He's very loyal to his people, and he put a stop to it.
The taxpayer-funded White House communications staff, they're saying, we don't do those public meetings with the press because the press wasn't being good to Trump. How much of that hollowing out creates the context for something like this week to happen and not feel as big as it might otherwise?
Look, there are a few things going on. I think that we need to call this president what he is. He's a fascist. He's an autocrat. He's a dictator. He has no respect for the rule of law. This is all about Trump maintaining power. But part of the way that he does it is exactly what he did today. He just comes out and admits his crimes. He admitted his intent to do this way in that interview with George Stephanopoulos. But because there is no pushback against him in any formal sense, because Democrats have said we're afraid that we will lose in 2020, he is being normalized as a guy who, you know, essentially a lot of his base is saying, well, if it were really that bad, he wouldn't admit to it. But this is also a man who said he could shoot someone in the middle of Times Square and nobody would do anything to him. So he's literally a habitual line stepper. He's just pushing and pushing and pushing to see what he can get away with. You know, and also, I mean, I think we should talk about the logic of a man who has the American public obsessed with him building basically a big fence around the barnyard while he's inviting the fox into the hen house. Like, what kind of logic is that you would invite a foreign power to intervene in and ruin the integrity of U.S. elections, but have the American people feeling like the problem is that all of these other foreign actors want to come in and take America away? It's completely insane.
Right. To your point on just the rhetoric, it's America first unless you need someone to do dirty work, in which case it's Ukraine first.
Or any other country that's willing to do his bidding, which says that this is not a president who is ideologically driven necessarily. He's driven by one thing, and that's the protection of Donald Trump.
Yeah. And Richard, since we came on the air in the last few moments, I just received breaking news out of Washington in the House where we're talking about tracking the impeachment caucus, there is a new member, Congresswoman Craig, who says that she is now, because of this, joining the ranks. That raises the number from when we started on the air at 135 to now 136. I'm reading from, in addition to her tweet there, her prepared statement. She says, basically, quote, the current investigations into corruption must continue, and when there's an abuse of power of this magnitude, Richard, she says, quote, it's our responsibility to stand up for what's right. That's why I'm calling to open impeachment proceedings immediately. What does it tell you, Richard, that it was this incident that put that person over the edge, one more Congress person joining the caucus there?
That's Angie Craig. That's my Congresswoman. I have talked to her about this repeatedly over the past few months, and I'm glad to say right now that I will strongly support her re-election in the 2nd Congressional District of Minnesota. The Angie Craig has made the right decision, as has apparently Dean Phillips from the 3rd Congressional District of Minnesota. I congratulate Congresswoman Craig. When the impeachment occurs, it will go to the Senate. And yes, the Senate may decide to acquit Donald Trump. That will not strengthen Donald Trump. That impeachment acquittal by Mitch McConnell and his cronies in the Senate will be no better than an acquittal in 1965 of a Klansman by an all-white jury in Mississippi. Everybody knows what's going to happen in the Senate. That is no justification for refusing to impeach. It is time for Speaker Pelosi to demand an impeachment articles be voted out of the House and start the trial in the Senate.
Well, and this,
now.
We're tired
of it.
Let me take Richard, who, as you remind us, is a Minnesotan. Let me take this to Walter on the larger question. Richard making the argument that Democrats have, at least Pelosi and the leadership, have framed this the wrong way and saying, well, if you impeach and nothing happens and the senator is not removed, then does that make sense? And he's flipping it and saying, if you don't impeach, then the House leader, starting with Speaker Pelosi, would appear complicit. That's the language we're seeing now from Senator Warren as well. Whereas if you do, it's McConnell and others that appear complicit. With that in mind, I want to play Joe Biden, who's obviously in the thicket of this, but who is not exactly with Richard and you, I think, on the constitutional remedies. Take a look.
He is violating every basic norm of a president. You should be asking him the question, why is he on the phone with a foreign leader, trying to intimidate a foreign leader, if that's what happened? Trump's doing this because he knows I'll beat him like a drum. And he's using the abuse of power and every element of the presidency to try to do something to smear me.
Walter, can he beat anyone like a drum if there is enough interference to call into question the propriety of the election? And does that mean that, in your view, Joe Biden is wrong to not go further?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't tend to think in political terms, and those are the words of a candidate. And even with regard to strategy for the impeachment, that's not how I'm wired to think. I'm focused more on the fact that we're facing a crisis moment in America where a president of the United States has solicited an attack on our election. And we get bogged down sometimes in either thinking of it from the political perspective or from a criminal law perspective where we're looking at technical elements of a crime. I think the basic question for the American people and for every member of Congress on both sides of the aisle is, can we tolerate a president of the United States using his high office to ask a foreign country to attack our election? Because an election is the only thing that makes us a republic.
Right.
It's really well stated. I'm out of time. Quickly, Brittany, please.
The thing here is Pelosi has to do something about this. If she doesn't, she could be accused of following the same logic of Donald Trump, which is that in order to hold on to political power, I will sublimate the rule of law.
Yeah, and that's really strong coming from you. I mean, we've heard a lot of views tonight, but I think we're landing with several of the panelists talking about the higher and really nonpartisan questions of how do you resolve this, regardless of whatever the short-term politics may be for whichever party. Richard Painter, Walter Shaub, and Brittany Cooper feel smarter and more concerned, having listened to each of you at the top of our show. Thank you. Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.